I got a new sponsorship sheet yesterday, the day before, I have one. But that's one that's pretty consistent, so. Well, usually what changes is, that's why the sponsorship is up. That's what changes.
All right, you want to call right now? You're in the studio this weekend, right? Mom will be joining you.
Are you gonna be here?
All right, so I think we are live, and we're joined by Dr. Michael Chang. He is an assistant professor at UT Health. Thank you so much for being here and answering questions that are so pressing and so important. Dr. Chang, I know that we've talked before just on a variety of issues in just COVID-19 in general and the vaccine. So first off, I wanted to start off by asking you, the directive that has come from the CDC determining that COVID-19 vaccines are safe for children 12 and up. So when do you think, because a lot of parents are asking when their child can get the vaccine and 12 and under, when do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, we're still waiting for those trials to publish or submit their data to the FDA. I haven't heard a recent update about how that recruitment's going. I think kind of the behind the scenes discussion is that we're still potentially shooting for the fall for some of the younger age groups to start potentially getting an authorization for vaccination. And so I would think for kids under 12, we're probably still looking in that time frame, maybe before school starts, but I think it'll be somewhere in the fall that we'll start hearing about the authorization for kids younger than 12.
And how safe is this vaccine for children? Because that's a concern as well. And are there any side effects that parents need to know about?
Yeah, so what we have information about that's been publicly available now from the FDA and from the vaccine companies is safety data for the 12 to 15-year-olds from the Pfizer vaccine. And Moderna recently published some high-level results for their adolescent trials. And both have suggested that their vaccinations are very safe. There were no serious side effects noted in either of the kind of top line results for either of those vaccines. Now, Moderna does not have emergency use authorization yet for anyone under 18. Pfizer is the only vaccine that's available for adolescents down to 12 years of age. The safety profile in that initial clinical trial, or the kind of added on clinical trial that led to the emergency use authorization for that 12 to 15-year-old age group, it seemed to show that the vaccine was safe for that age group.
Okay. And when it comes to swimming pools, we know that those are very popular right now. And there might be some concern as to other people that are in the pool. Can the virus transfer inside of the pool? What's your advice on that? And also advice on folks that are just going out and about to the beaches?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that people are going out. I think that's great. I'm glad they're able to enjoy being outside. Certainly for fully immunized adolescents and adults, they should enjoy the outdoors as much as they can. It's been raining, but here in Houston, but when you can get outside, that's great. And again, fully immunized people can certainly enjoy the outdoors. The vaccines have been proven to be effective against serious illness thus far, and so I think you definitely go to the beach, go to the pool. So then the question, this came up actually very early in the pandemic too. People were wondering, could the virus be transmitted through like the water, both in like the ocean or at the pool? And the answer is we don't think so. So remember that pools generally are either chlorinated or treated in some way. And so we don't think the virus is transmissible that way. We don't think it can travel through the seawater. And so we're not really worried about that particular mode of transmission. Keeping in mind, again, this virus, COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is still a respiratory virus. And so the mode of transmission is still going to be those aerosols and droplets that can pass from person to person. So again, highly recommend going to the pool, highly recommend going to the beach. But at the same time, you still want to try to avoid crowds, as much as possible. If you have young children, if they can tolerate wearing a mask, again, CDC is still recommending children potentially wear masks if they're going to be in a crowded indoor space. Outdoor spaces, again, present much lower risk. But I think being outside, being at the pool, being at the beach, I think is a safe activity to do. And parents should be relatively unconcerned about that particular scenario. But at the same time, it's super crowded, and there are a lot of kids right now coughing and sneezing. I've heard about it from pediatricians and from parents. If there's people like kind of actively sick, you might want to try to avoid them. Try to do physical distancing with those people. But again, outdoor activities do seem to be at a much lower risk, even for unimmunized people, really. But for fully immunized people, certainly very low risk of being outside.
And you bring up a good point because it's a respiratory disease. So you could be in the pool, but if there's a lot of people and one kid sneezes, to the next, that's not going to, you're still in the pool, right? So you can.
That's exactly right. So it's not the pool, right? It's that person next to you in the pool.
Right.
Could still sneeze on you, I guess.
Yes.
And so that's a potential risk.
And they're still learning manners. So it's like, make sure you cover your mouth.
Yes. The covering, the coughs and sneezes.
Yes, we are learning that in my house. So I was going to ask you this as well. There's so many like parties and get-togethers now with the question to ask, which has been awkward to some people, and one of the viewers and one of my friends also asked me the same thing, which is it okay to ask how many people are going to be at this party and if people are going to be wearing masks? I mean, it does become awkward, but it's important, right?
Yeah, I think it is important. And it comes down to how each person is going to assess their kind of level of risk averseness, like how much risk are you willing to take, right? So if I were to host a party, I would try to let people know that information, right? Like, hey, I'm going to have a party. We're going to keep it to less than, 10 people. For people that are concerned, we're not going to, you can wear your mask if you feel more comfortable wearing your mask. We're certainly not going to have any issues with people who want to wear a mask. People who are fully immunized don't need to be masked indoors in smaller group settings. And so I think if I were hosting a party, I would try to let people have that information ahead of time. Now, on the flip side, if you're going to a party and you don't know, then I think, again, for your level of kind of how you calculate risk for yourself is how you're going to ask, right? So if you're not too worried about it and you're saying, I'm immunized and I'm fully immunized, and most of the people I know that this person knows are fully immunized, then maybe you're not so concerned about it, right? But at the same time, and some people just aren't going to be concerned about it to begin with. But if you are still concerned, you have maybe someone at home who could not get vaccinated, who's a high-risk individual, then and you're worried about potentially having that virus, bringing that home to that person, then I think you just have to do what's best for you. And if that includes asking how many people are going to be at the party, whether they're going to wear masks, when indoors or not, I think you have to take the measures that you feel are necessary to protect yourself and the individuals around you. Again, I want to emphasize, though, for fully immunized people, even if you don't know the immunization status of everyone that's going to be at the party, your individual risk of contracting COVID and having symptomatic COVID is low. Now, it's not zero, right? Mm-hmm. But and again, assessing your home situation, like if it's you and your partner and you're both fully immunized and you're going to the party, if you're fully immunized, like I said, it's less important to know what everyone else's kind of like status is. And it's less important if everyone kind of strictly follows physical distancing and masking guidelines. That's kind of one of the risk kind of adjustments that happens once you have been fully immunized. And then you can go home, you're not worried about it, right? Because both of the people are fully immunized. Again, you have to adjust that risk if you have someone at home who couldn't be immunized, or you have a different kind of concern about the risk of getting COVID infection.
Is it going too far if you have, little name tags that says, No hugs, please.
Some people might prefer that even if we didn't have COVID.
I know, right?
So
Let's be honest, right?
yeah,
So another thing happening this summer camps, and a lot of them are outdoors, which is obviously safer. But for parents, there are some camps that are indoors as well for their children. So what are some of the questions that they should be asking?
Yeah, I think one thing you want to know, first of all, is again, what are the policies going to be, right? So just up front, if you know what the policies are going to be, you can make a decision about whether you feel comfortable sending your child to that camp or not. So that would be number one. Like, are you planning to continue physical distancing? Are you planning to continue for certain age groups to wear masks or not? Can you give me an estimate about the percentage of outside activities versus inside activities? And most importantly, and this is something I think we kind of forget about, which is we talk a lot about like, what are we going to do ahead of time? But one thing I always tell parents to ask about is what happens if someone gets sick at the camp, right? So like if someone develops symptoms that are potentially consistent with COVID-19 while they're at camp, like what is the camp's plan for that? Are they going to send them home? Are they going to isolate them right away? Like do they have requirements for testing before the camper can come back? What about a staff person? What if one of the counselors gets sick? So to me, that's kind of more important because if you identify the person who's sick early and you can get them isolated, you can minimize kind of like the spread from that person, right? So I think that kind of response, the question is arguably more important than kind of what you would do, like what are they planning to do ahead of time? So kind of what are you going to do when somebody does get sick? Like what's the plan for that? So those are things. Yeah. And then the other piece is just kind of like, can you give me an estimate of like how many of your counselors and staff are age groups? And kind of getting an idea of the demographics of who is going to be hanging out with your kids. And again, it is important. I do want parents to remember though that children, fortunately, are less likely to have symptomatic disease and less likely to have severe disease. So, I think with rates generally going down in the region and with more people being immunized, each individual child's risk of contracting COVID-19 is lower than it was last summer by far. And so, again, for each family, kind of have to calculate your risk on your own. There's not a great way to like tell kind of a blanket like plan for everybody. But yeah, so if you have most of the staff immunized, then, as a parent, you can feel more comfortable with your child at that camp, even potentially without that much physical distancing and without masks.
So it's basically, be asking those questions and unapologetically because
yeah,
it is
absolutely. I think it's the same thing now about if you think about like again, it's like taking responsibility for your personal risk, right? So like if you're planning to go to a bar, do you have a designated driver? Is there a plan for like it's
right.
Like a similar kind of preventive type of questioning, right? So it's not like you're judging anybody for going out to have a drink, but say that they become intoxicated, like do they have a plan for that, right? So like and it's a similar kind of, at least in my mind, a similar way of thinking, which is okay, we're planning to do this, which is fine, and now I just need to understand what are my risks.
Right. Okay, so thank you to all the Facebook viewers and your comments. So here's a question. A Facebook viewer is concerned that it's only emergency approved and not fully tested. We're talking about the vaccine. So how safe is the vaccine since it's not fully tested?
Yeah, I mean, again, everybody's kind of like assessment of safety and effectiveness is going to be different. And there's going to be some people who will not accept an answer less than 100%, I guess, or effectiveness or safety. And so, that's a difficult standard for any vaccination to reach. So the question is like, what is the difference? Really, what you need to understand is kind of like, what's the difference between an emergency use authorization and what's the difference between being fully FDA approved, right? So, and so the for this particular scenario, there's actually not that much difference. And I say that, and so let me explain kind of like why I say that. So because of the way the pandemic was kind of spreading throughout the globe, the decision for these clinical trials that led to the emergency use authorization actually did involve many of the steps that also lead to approval. And the difference between authorization and approval is generally kind of the duration that you look for how long something stays effective. So for vaccines, you would say, normally the FDA would wait 6 months to make sure that the immunization lasts that long, to look at how long the immunity lasts. And then the other thing that the FDA does when you're talking about approval is looking at whether the manufacturer of the vaccine really can produce the vaccine in a consistent fashion to deliver the doses. And so sometimes for authorization, what you may have is a few doses of the vaccine, in a clinical trial that shows that it's effective, but there's not necessarily the oversight about where's the vaccine made, what's the process in place? Are you sure you can deliver 100 million doses in a safe and consistent fashion that it's always going to be effective? But because of how urgent kind of the need for the vaccine was, the FDA said we need these doses, and so we do need to be sure that the manufacturing processes and all that is in place. And so, the step to approval from the emergency use authorization that's been granted for these vaccines is actually not that far away. And so, in this particular scenario, the difference between approval and authorization was not a big difference. So of course, people are worried about safety primarily. Did we look long enough for safety problems? And I think one of the things to keep in mind about vaccine safety is that historically, and with this vaccine too, when people have started complaining of problems, they usually have happened very shortly in a short time frame after the vaccine was administered. So vaccine side effects. Again, historically and with this vaccine now, it's not that it took 2 years for the side effect to show up. It's just that the side effect is so uncommon that we didn't, let's say it happens in 1 in 100 million people, right?
Mhm.
Well, if you don't immunize the 100 millionth person for 9 months, then you wouldn't know, right, for 9 months. And it's not that it took 9 months for that side effect to show up. It's just that, and even now, when you look at the reports of side effects of the vaccines for COVID-19, they're showing up within 2 weeks. The clotting, the clot issue, the thrombosis issue with the Johnson & Johnson AstraZeneca, all those patients were developing this particular syndrome within a couple of weeks of receiving the vaccine. And so it's not that it took 6 months for them to develop the clot. It happened really quickly. It's just that until you immunize enough people over time to see that side effect, you wouldn't. It takes longer. So when people are worried that we haven't watched it long enough, that's true in the sense that if it's a 1 in 100 million, side effect, or if it's a 1 in 1 billion side effect, we haven't immunized 1 billion people, and so we may not know about that particular side effect. But then when you look at the risk for each individual, it's what, and so this is where population kind of statistics versus individual risk gets a little bit tricky, right? So it's okay, it's 1 in 1 billion, but I don't know if I'm that 1 in 1 billion person that's going to have that side effect, right? So then you kind of have to think about okay, well, what's my risk of getting COVID now? What's my risk of having a serious side effect of COVID infection, actual infection, versus what's my risk of having a side effect of from this vaccine? And so, a lot of people, I think, are calculating what's my risk of a side effect from the vaccine versus no vaccine. And really, what you should be thinking about is what's my risk of something happening if I get COVID infection versus what's my risk of something happening if I get the vaccine. And again, you may be. Most people, luckily, are recovering from their COVID illness. There are those people who have long-term issues. So even if you got infection, you may be that, person who is fine. But we also have a lot of data about if you get vaccine, you are more than likely going to be the person who is fine. And so, that's kind of how I think about the risk benefit of vaccination. So when you look at what's known, what data is actually there and available for you to look at, it's okay, we have 170 million doses of vaccine administered now, something like that, I believe. And then you look at the side effects that have been reported, and and you can say that's a known fact now, like that's an objective number. And you can also look at how many infections have been reported and look at how many deaths for the number of infections, and you can weigh that risk. And for me right now, the benefit of vaccination definitely outweighs my potential risk of getting a serious problem from COVID.
All right.
Sorry, that was long-winded, but
no, it makes sense though, because you got to look at the statistics part of the whole thing. From my understanding, it's like giving a child Tylenol. Like the child might react a certain way, but that might be one out of X amount that reacts that way. But you still want to give your child Tylenol.
Right.
That has more benefit to it than a possible risk, which might be rare. So I was going to ask you, do you hear the static on your mic?
I do not. Sorry.
Okay. There is some static. I'm not sure if the mic's like fully plugged in or what you're using.
I am using a USB microphone.
Okay.
And maybe the gain is too high.
Maybe. Sorry about that, folks. Hope you're all having a wonderful Friday.
This is, I guess, live.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Is it so that mic? Can you use your camera?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to switch.
All right, we'll switch there.
All right, tried a different mic.
Oh, this is great. Yes.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay. So, can you give us some basic? So when we were just wrapping up what you were saying. So basically, the takeaway with that, because it's a big question and a very common one. How safe is the vaccine?
Yeah, so the too long summary of it is it appears to be very safe and it appears to be very effective. And again, you are seeing that in real time, right? Essentially, what you're seeing now is like the proportion of infections is higher in unimmunized age groups. And those age groups are now making up a higher proportion of the new infections that are being reported. So luckily, the total number of new infections is going down, but the proportion of those infections happening in unvaccinated individuals is now, much higher. And so you're seeing much less hospitalizations and fortunately much less death because those high risk groups are now, like over 65 in the United States, we have like over 75% of fully immunized. And so, we've seen that shift from people who were immunized now, who were really high risk before, who are now immunized, like the burden of the disease is like shifting to the unimmunized people. So again, luckily the total number is small, but now the denominator of people who could become symptomatic or have severe illness is smaller too. And so, so you can see that it's effective in real time, with the shift in there. And then you can see that with all the, 100 million doses given, you can look at the number of serious side effects that have been reported against the number of total COVID cases and the number of deaths and hospitalizations from that.
All right. And just some bullet points on the vaccine. Is it free? The 2 doses? I mean, if you could, for somebody who has no idea about the vaccine, what can they expect with the children?
So with respect to children for ages 12 to 15, and then 12 to 18, I should say, there is a Pfizer vaccine available. And then for 18 and up, there are the Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. So really the only vaccine that's currently authorized for use in that 12 to 15 and 16 to 18 age group is the Pfizer vaccine. So this is a mRNA vaccine. It is 2 doses that are 3 weeks apart, and you get it in your arm. The first dose is usually pretty well tolerated. The most common side effect is kind of local injection site pain, maybe some redness or swelling around the injection site. The second dose is also well tolerated, but there are more people who report some, fatigue or malaise or more arm soreness, sometimes a low-grade temperature with that second dose. It is free. There's multiple ways you can get the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, if you're in that age group. The community vaccination sites, check with your pediatric providers. check with retail pharmacies, and there are resources now on the CDC website about where you can find vaccine for 12 to 18-year-olds for the Pfizer vaccine.
All right. So you recommend the vaccine, the big takeaway for children.
Yeah, my recommendation is to get vaccinated. And I think, like I said, you have essentially what is known, data that's available versus calculating against the unknown of what happens if my child gets the COVID infection. Like if my child actually gets infected, I don't know what's going to happen. Again, luckily, kids have done well. Again, less likely to be symptomatic, less likely to have severe disease, and those are all. I'm very pleased with that as a pediatrician. Like that's like been one of the best things about this pandemic, I guess, is that kids have been less affected. But at the same time, I don't know, right? It comes back to that kind of risk. Like, I don't know if my child's going to be the one that does require hospitalization or does require, an ICU stay. But I can have a better kind of quantifiable risk assessment of the vaccine.
All right. One last question. So back to school is right around the corner and summer school happening now. What advice for keeping kids healthy? Because we know during the cold and flu seasons, frequently spreads throughout the family. They might be concerned about the coronavirus as well. So how important is it for teachers and staff to be vaccinated as well?
Yeah, so, in the early phases of the pandemic, it did seem like adults were more likely to spread to kids. So it is really important for teachers and staff that are working with kids under the age of 12 and to be immunized. One, to protect the kids, but then also to protect yourself when you're kind of going about and doing your daily activities. Again, if kids can physically distance, do good hand hygiene, if they can tolerate wearing a mask, those are all good things, not just for COVID, but for all types of infections. Like I said, I'm hearing a lot about coughs and runny noses and infections that we typically think of in the winter, now happening in spring and summer, and not necessarily COVID, but all the other respiratory viruses that we were able to kind of keep from spreading with those hygiene principles, those infection prevention principles, they're showing up now because we're relaxing them. So again, I'm not even talking about COVID-19. We're talking about things like respiratory syncytial virus, flu, et cetera. So anyway, if they can, keep on with the isolation, the physical distancing, the mask, the hygiene. Teachers should be immunized and staff, and then just use some common sense and try to stay safe.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this rainy afternoon, Dr. Michael Chang, again with UT Health. And I hope that if anybody else has any questions, please put it in the comments here, and we'll definitely try to do something like this again and get those questions answered as soon as possible. Thanks again, Dr. Chang.
Yeah, no problem.